My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran Neo, fellow Jnanis. The last satsang, I started off with the chariot model to explain this chapter called life. And it's quite interesting that the chariot model is used in many scriptures, both in the Hindu scriptures and many other scriptures to depict life. And we went through the chariot model, and I'm going to go through the chariot model because, as I showed earlier, the chariot model has 11 stations, right? And the 11 stations, we covered 5 of it, and you see that the first 2 stations were what we call the experience of the object or the gross matter, which is both the path that we take and also the body that we have. And then the remainder, 8 is related to the mechanisms of experience. We call it the subtle matter. In Sanskrit, we call it antakarana, of the mind. And sometimes in most scriptures, they just talk about the mind. And here I break down the mind into 8 parts. And if we understand the 8 parts, then we see that how do we manage those different parts, because there are interrelationship between them. And then finally, the last aspect is the experience of the subject. So there are many descriptions given by various masters. And this is a description that, I've received, through introspection, contemplation, reflection, through Mahan's teachings, and also reflecting on all the great works done by the great masters, including the Bhagavad Gita and many, even watching many of those various movies, the Roman movies, of where the chariots play a key role and how they treasure chariots as part of their journey to win wars. So having said this, the last time we covered the following. We covered the first one of what the path is and understanding the rules of engagement in the material universe, understanding our body that goes through these experiences in this material world. An integral part of that is our senses, the 5 horses that we have, or sometimes we call it the 5 rivers that brings, all the information into, our own sensory perceptions, conceptions, and also gives us that experience of this material world. And then I also spoke about how that 5 senses transmits information through electrical pulse, which is captured by our neural pathways, and that rains. All 5 of them combines to give us that one experience, you see, and that's held by a very important part, which is the mind. That's an important hold between the mind and the senses. And that hold is really important, as I said in the last time, that when that hold of the mind to the senses is not strong, the senses go in a different direction. In that same way, we see that when the driver's hold on the horses are not strong, and the horses know that the driver is not paying attention, you see that the horses are not getting the right instructions. They all go in different directions. So in the same way, we see that the driver, if he does not hold the horses really well, he doesn't know the temperament of the horses. So he doesn't know how to ride each of those horses in a more unison way. So there's a 2-way feedback that takes place between the rider and the horses. The horses feel the sensation and the vibration of the driver. The driver is strong, tight. The horses will know what to follow, and sometimes a small jolt will tell the horses, okay, you've got to move right or left or go straight. So that firm hold is really important. In that same way, the driver understands the horse's temperament. If a particular horse is going, not in line with what he wants, he could pull it back gently to bring it. So that hold is so important. It's very similar to our own mind's hold for our senses. Sometimes the mind wants things in a particular way, but the senses go in different directions. Our sight, our, what we hear, what we speak, sometimes are not coordinated. So we see that, in the same way, sometimes the mind is also receiving information, and if from all the senses, and if the mind is not focused, sometimes we're not getting full information from the senses. So that grip is so important, the mind senses bond, which I covered in the last satsang. So today I'm going to then cover another important aspect is the intellect. What's the role of the intellect in this mechanism of experience? I'll go into in depth. And then I'm going to talk about the conch. Why is conch there in this picture? And most people don't give an explanation of the role of the conch, but there is a important reverence of this conch. It is a bond between the intellect and the mind, and I'll speak about that. You may not see this in many of the discussions, but this is a very important discussion that I picked up in a lot of Mahan's teachings and in some of the great masters' teachings. And the third aspect today I want to cover is the subconscious mind. We are conscious of many things. There are many things that are embedded in our mind by nature or by the cosmic force that we may not know. And how do we extract that information? How is that information embedded in us? And how do we learn to listen and unlock that information? In our memory, there are memories that we generate. There are memories that are already embedded in it, in our mind. And one would ask, where does it come from? And where does it come from? You'll have to wait for next week, right? So, but I'm going to say there is information already there in our DNA that is imprinted even before our own material mind started, having its own personality. So I'm going to focus today on these three elements: the intellect, the conch, and our subconscious mind. So let's proceed. So let's talk about the driver. Who is the driver? And the important thing is that so our mind consists of several components, and one of the components is the driver. The driver within the mind is that which essentially introspects when information comes in. Sometimes the mind may react quickly, but when we train the mind to introspect, think about it very carefully before making any decisions. Contemplate, reflect, and meditate very carefully on each thought that is coming through, like an electron microscope. And we see that when every thought, you see that people say thoughts are flowing in our mind. And often we see, if you look very carefully, we see that thoughts come one at a time. And sometimes we don't have time to introspect each thought. But think of it as it may be going really fast, but if we slow down, if we practice meditation, that introspection, contemplation, the thoughts initially will be very fast. After a while, it slows down. And at some point, the thought is just right in front of you. And the intellect is like an electron microscope, will just penetrate through to see what's the root of this thought, where does it come from, why is it here, what is the benefit, or what are the negativity, or how does this thought expand my mind or shrink my mind. So this ability that the mind has, which is part of the faculty called intellect. And we need to be able to practice this. We need to be able to put it to, test regularly. So sometimes before reacting, it's always good to step back. And this, when we do this ability, when we nurture this ability of introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, we start seeing something very important happen. The particular thought is there. We know why it is there. What's the impact? What we are now doing is analyzing the thought. And then we start saying, hey, this thought is going to make me happy. This thought is going to, it's a little bit more challenging. So you start seeing, oh, this thought is going to be transitory. This thought is going to leave a permanent impact on me. So it starts differentiating and discriminating between what's real and what's unreal. Sometimes, in most cases, most of the thoughts will just are fleeting and transitory, and for unnecessary reason, we hold on to it. So this ability to introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate enables us to analyze these thoughts very, very carefully and be able to discriminate. It's a very beautiful term called viveka, to be able to separate what is real and unreal, what is transitory and what is permanent, what is eternal and what is impermanent. So this ability to what is finite and what is infinite. So the mind is able to differentiate, sift out this and say, okay, these transitory ones, these temporary ones, I can let it go. The ones that are more everlasting, I chalk it into my memory so that when I need it, I can retrieve it. So this ability to discriminate, analyze, discriminate helps us to acquire the knowledge that is now transferred into our memory, and our mind now becomes a important and a powerful library. When we need that information, when something happens, that information is retrieved, we can make relationships, and we can make inferences and make decisions. So we see that this intellect plays a key role, but it has to start with that ability to introspect, contemplate, reflect, and meditate. Now, once we have that ability to acquire viveka, another quality that emerges from us is that ability to, this quality called vairagya. Vairagya means the ability to not be impacted by anything, not because most of the thoughts are transitory and will pass, right? And why get caught up by it? So this ability to not be caught up by this thoughts. In Tamil, we say that a very nice term called patrachanala, the ability to be transcendental to these thoughts. This is the English word. So the type of knowledge that we acquire, the type of knowledge we acquire from this introspection, there are two types of knowledge. One is this contemporary knowledge. The knowledge that is continuously changing. What's today may not be tomorrow, and something new emerges. And this is part of life. What was right today may not be right tomorrow. And similarly, so we need to understand that dynamics of change that is happening. Change happens in our body, and sometimes our perspective of life also changes because of our changes in our biology, changes in our mindset, changes in our understanding, right? So you see, even in history continuously changes. The second type of knowledge is the knowledge about what we call eternal knowledge, knowledge that is unchanging. It's the truth. It's the axiom, it is unchanging, right? So there is things in the universe that is continuously changing, and there are things in the universe that does not change. For example, we see that we know we cannot create nor destroy energy. It's omnipresent there. But we know that the energy can change from, kinetic to potential energy and so on. So we see that there is a transitoriness, but there's also a permanence, facet of that. So in the same thing, we see that within ourselves, there are part of us that are changing, there are part of us that is unchanging. And this is what the intellect starts sifting out. Hey, what is it that is changing? Why is this change taking place? Is the change taking place on a substratum that is changeless? What is that changelessness? So this is what the intellect starts focusing on. So what's Maya, which is continuously changing, and what's Maypurul, which is unchanging? And that's what we have the faculty, and we need to nurture that. The next one is actually on the conch. So coming back, so this is the sixth station in us that is crucial, that we need to continuously work towards developing. The more deeper and the more wider our intellect becomes, the more deeper and wider our knowledge bank or memory becomes in our library. And if we sort out our library really well, we see that when we want that information, accessing that information becomes very easy. And that's part of the process of thinking logically, thinking in a scientific way, as opposed to in a non-systematic way. So logic, reason, scientific approaches enables us to look at systematic steps of why something happens or why something does not happen. And that helps us to store that in our memory bank, in our library. But think of if your library is you've got a lot of information and the library is not organized really well. What happens is that when you want that information, you're continuously thinking, where is this, and you're unable to access that information. So part of that, a well-organized intellect becomes a solid and strong, partner in helping us move deeper and having a better understanding of the life around us, the life within us, and the dynamics between the external and the internal cosmos. Now, coming back to the seventh station, which is the conch. And you see that the conch is held by the driver. And this is sometimes that is not well explained in this chariot. What is the role of the conch? And if you see that the conch is held in a hand very, very tightly, and it's held by the driver, right? And this is about discipline. So the conch has got a very important, reason to be there. We see that the conch actually is to signal to the mind, get ready. It's a way to signal the horses, get ready for battle, right? So in all battles, you have a battle cry, right? So you're getting ready for taking on the challenges ahead of you. Sometimes you see that this, we have the bagpipe, we have, the trumpets, and so on. So these are very similar, but in this context, they play the same role. And you see that sometimes the trumpeter, there's a particular tune he will play if there's going to war, or if there's a particular tune they will play if they're retreating, or they play a particular tune when, many of their, army have died, and there's a kind of a somber mood, right? So this conch or this trumpet is to signal to the mind that let's keep focus, let's be illumined, and let's prepare for that race, this battle, right? Be courageous, be strong, be confident, and you see that, it's also to prepare the senses. Okay, get ready, right? Let's take on this battle, right? Somewhat like, we're telling, yes, we can do it. The coach is telling you, yes, let's do it. Like before any game, you see that rally, yes, Or in Malaysia, we also have this Malaysia Boleh, yes, we can do it, Or if you are in New Zealand, before any game, they have this haka, which is to give people that confidence that, yes, we all can work together to overcome the challenger. And when the challenger sees the haka, they get frightened because it's quite terrifying for them that this is a tough adversary. So the conch plays that important role in sending the signal to the horses and the mind to get ready, but also sending a signal to the adversary that, yes, you're going to have a formidable, challenger ahead of you. So again, in some cases, you see that in particularly the Romans, they'll have the kind of armor, and then they'll take the kind of the weapon and hit it. And when they hit it, it makes a very loud sound that the army that are ahead of them will get frightened. And sometimes they run away. So in that same way, the conch plays an important role in all of us. We need to have something that motivates us, something that inspires us, something that says, look, yes, no matter what the challenge is, we're going to go through this, and win. And this is what, if you see in many great saints and sages, that motivation, inspiration comes in many ways. One of the quotes, sometimes we have inspirational quotes that really inspires us to take challenging things. I like this quote by, Morgan Freeman. He says that the highest power is the human mind. He says nothing can beat the human mind, That's where God came from. And my belief in God is my belief in self. This is something that I learned too. I always say that if God is core to me, and if God is part and parcel of me, what more do I need? No matter what the battle is, I think with God on my side and God driving my chariot, I have no problems, right? And that's the kind of inspiration that the human mind needs. Another example is that sometimes people, the mind is weak. Here is a 12th century, 2nd century, philosopher, Plutarch. He says that the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. Really inspiring, like what the conch should do, right? Inspirational words to motivate. Another one by Swami Vivekananda, he says, if the mind is intensively eager, everything can be accomplished. Means, yes, we can do it. Mountains can be crumbled into atoms. Even how big of a task you could break it down into minute things. You can digest into a digestible thing. Even how titanic of a challenge it is, you can subsume it and digest it and attain enlightened, get that nourishment from that mighty Titanic of a challenge. What scars become a star. And the last one, I really like this quote, is that by Swami Vivekananda. He says that mind is not a dustbin to keep anger, hatred, and jealousy. So again, if you see, when a war battle is, when the conch is sung or conch is sounded, you see that the fear of, sometimes some of the soldiers know they're going to die. There may be fear in their hearts. There may be doubts in their mind. And when the conch plays, it inspires that, and it just completely evacuates that fear and that the doubts and so on. It says that all the garbage leaves, and you see that it's inspired by fire. And this is what Swami Vivekananda says: mind is not a dustbin to keep anger, hatred, jealousy, but it's a treasure box to keep love, happiness, and sweet memories. In that same way, the conch is to signal us that we need to start getting rid of the thoughts that make our mind shrunken. We need to nurture thoughts that expands our mind, thoughts that makes our mind lofty, thoughts that make our mind transcendental. And that's what the conch is. And you'll see that later on I'll speak about that conch, that sense, that vibration is nothing but actually what Mahan speaks about is that unarvu, that vibration that neutralizes all other material thoughts. I'll come back to that in the later part of our discussion. So the conch is essentially the vibration, but the question that you need to ask is that who gives that vibration? Where does it come from? Who is, blowing in that conch? And that's the next question that you need to ask. So that comes back then that somebody is blowing that conch. Somebody is inspiring. The message is coming from somewhere. Where is that? Where is that mind getting this from? And this is what the station 8 is, which is the subconscious mind that all of us have, that is inbuilt in our DNA. And you see that this happens naturally to all of us, including every animal. The first thing is that, there's this, whenever an animal is, confronted with something, including human beings, fear comes in, and fear is a way to run away from that challenge. And fear is core to with human beings and animals. But when they are cornered and there is nowhere to run, what happens is that, either you fight or you flight. If you cannot, if there's no place for you to run away or flight, there is something in you say, look, let's fight it out, right? So if you see that when you corner a cat and it's nowhere to run, it'll start, showing its teeth and starting to, same thing with every human being. The first instinct is to run away from challenges or danger. When you confront it and there's no place to go, the human mind just stands up and stands to that challenge. Two things will happen. Either it gets wiped out, or it will stand and fight and win the war. And this is what in this part of the station says, that something is built in us, that fight or flight that nature's built in us. And that subconscious mind or memory, it's in, within us. We need to start unlocking. How do we minimize that fright or the flight to that which fight? We stand up and overcome those challenges. So everything is inbuilt in our DNA. How we unlock that requires a tremendous amount of knowledge. And this is what later on I'll come back to. What's that knowledge? And this knowledge is sometimes called the dharmic knowledge. I spoke about dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. Dharma is that the knowledge that makes the mind strong, powerful, resilient, agile, and transcendental. And this you can only acquire through deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, and meditation of that transcendental, eternal knowledge that is unlocked by great saints and sages in many of the scriptures. But we also need to know very well the contemporary knowledge, the knowledge of change and how to adapt to change and so on. So this dharmic knowledge is crucial for us to acquire artha, the wealth. And I spoke about the 10 capitals, from spiritual capitals to the emotional capital, to the intellectual capital, the creative capital, right up to the economic capital. This capital is very important for us to help us build resilience and also help us navigate a world that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous at times. So we see this subconscious natures built in us, both the fight and the flight, but it is for us to learn to unlock this, treasure within us. It is this knowledge, this part of our subconscious mind is devoid of form. There is nothing that you can touch. It's part of that experience of that universality. It's what we call the subtle part of nature that is embedded in our DNA, this cosmic intelligence. That if you go back to the earlier satsangs, I spoke about how our own, every form has got its, what we call the chain of custody. The lineage goes back to that cosmic intelligence that is, Swamiji calls it Irul. It is the infinite possibilities and potentialities. So this subtle nature of infinite possibilities and potentialities embedded in our DNA, right? It is what gives us that consciousness. It is what gives us that experience. And that is the interface. So the eighth station is the interface between the self and the intellect. How strong that intellect and that self is determines how illumined that intellect is in unlocking that dharmic knowledge, right? Which is great saints and sages, including Mahans, have made it so clear through their own journey of the inward journey and say, look, this is the simple manual for you to go within you. Try it out yourself and then develop your own manual, right? While they may have developed their own manuals, if you look at all the scriptures, are a particular manual for us to acquire that the journey within us. We need to take that and put it to practice and develop our own manual. And we may all have different manuals, right? And that's okay, but at least the general manual that is instructions been given by gurus or scriptures, that if we follow it very carefully, we'll develop our own manual. So that interface between the self and the intellect is really important. And this is where the time that helps us do this is that not the interactive, things that we do in the external world, but that quiet sublimity, the quietude that we generate in our mind through this deep introspection, contemplation, reflection, meditation, and that research to understand this journey within us. So we see this interrelationship is really crucial, this eighth station, which is very important for us to build that relationship. And we see this very beautifully said by Jalaluddin Rumi. He says that, the only way that we're going to be able to strengthen this is through the idea of helping our mind become silent. This whole process of attaining quietude. How does a human mind that is so noisy become quiet, right? Because in deep sleep, the mind becomes quiet, but in the waking state, it's continuously going on as like a galloping horse, right? How do we make it quiet? And here he says that the silence is the language of God. All else is a poor translation. Another, description of the self is that in that silence, the first S is silence. In the silence, you attain that expanded consciousness. In that expanded consciousness, one is not touched by the vagaries of life. One becomes transcendental. One attains that liberation. In the liberation, one attains that finality. That is what the self is. What all great saints and sages, including Mahan, has spoken about. So we see that eighth station is so important, that relationship between that self and that intellect. But without the early part of understanding the first seven, the eighth part will be very difficult to attain. That's why Mahan says Arivin Arival, that experiential learning is very important. Understanding the rules of engagement in the material world, understanding our senses, understanding our body, understanding how the neural pathway operates and how information flows through into our brain, understanding how the intellect forms thoughts, understanding how the intellect stops the thoughts and explores the thoughts and understand what is real and what is unreal, and then slowly understanding, okay, the things that I'm going to make my mind expanded, I'm going to hold on to, put in my memory bank. Things that are not important, I'm going to leave it out. Slowly, you build that knowledge treasure that becomes an amazing library that now enables us to go much more deeper to understand the self, the relationship between the subconscious and the conscious. Mahan says this very clearly. He says that as you go deeper in that flames of tapas, the awareness, I attain my own self. So he says that in that intense, understanding and the intense relationship between both the instructor and the passenger, or the subconscious mind, the conscious or the subconscious mind, I realize that they are the same. I attain that self. And finally, we see that, again, Rumi comes back and says, your mind, this globe of awareness. What is he talking about? The awareness that the subconscious is there, that is powering everything that is conscious. Is a starry universe. When you push off with your foot, he says that 1,000 new roads become very clear. He says that what we know as conscious, as we go deeper, we realize that it opens up into multitude, infinitude of subconscious and consciousness that it's unimaginable. And this is what that tells us now is that, this relationship enables our conscious mind to be powered by this infinite conscious state, the resources. Now, when we have that infinite resources, can you imagine now the driver has amazing potential to be able to navigate the mind, the horses, and to traverse the journey, no matter what the road is, no matter what the turns are going to be, no matter what the conditions of the road is, no matter what the climate issues are, the mind has infinite resources to navigate this chariot in the most smoothest, in the most best possible way to arrive at the journey, at the end of the journey. And this is what we see, that understanding this eighth station enables us to understand the relationship between the subconscious mind and the cosmic intelligence that is powering this conscious state of our existence. The question then is that you may want to ask, but where does the subconscious mind come from? Who powers this? How do we get this subconscious? What imprints this into our DNA? And for that, we see that, you will need to wait till next week. That, I'll take you through to the next step, which is essentially step 9, station 9, 10, and 11. That brings us to the complete journey. So what you have now is that we understand the conscious state, all the things that we need to ride this material world, but it's powered by a subconscious state, right, which is infinite, and if the conscious mind learns to harness it, you see that the conscious mind becomes infinite, transcendental, have the power to be able to navigate this material world beautifully in an inspirational way, no matter what that journey is going to, no matter what the terrain is going to be. So next class, I'm going to talk about how do we build that, how did we get that subconscious state? And who was responsible for the subconscious state? And how do we know the knower that has created this knowing process so that we know how to finally acquire the knowledge to navigate this journey? Sandosham.